was in high school, I had this friend called Vic. She was a weird kid, scrawny and dirty and unpopular. And we kind of ended up as friends because I was a weird kid too. There's a certain camaraderie, I guess, in constantly running into each other in the bathroom, cleaning spitballs out of her hair. We started to hang out, first at school, then after and on the weekends. Always at my place though, never at Vic's. My house was across the street from the Greenbelt, and Vic and I used to spend hours up there, building tree houses and catching frogs and all the other nonsense things kids get up to. We called it the Green and pretended it was a magical other world, made up this whole mythology to go around it. Like I said, Vic was weird. She always wore boys' hand-me-down clothes, ratty and full of holes. This was the 90s, the age of Seattle grunge, so I guess in some other world universe she would have been cool. In real life, she just smelt slightly of old cheese and flaked iron. I figured out what the iron smell was one day sitting in Ebflow Hollow, also known as the odd stormwater drain in the Green. It was a sweltering summer day, the sort where walking barefoot on pavement leaves blisters. I was in a tank top and Vic was still wearing her torn, dirty flannel, because Vic always wore her dirty, torn flannel. I guess I must have asked her about it, because I remember her giving me this really long, deep look. Then, very carefully, rolling up her sleeves. Suddenly, both the flannels and the iron smell made sense. Vic was a cutter. Everything from her wrists on up was just a tangled mass of old scarring and new scratches. Nothing suicide deep, just shallow stuff. Pain and frustration cuts. I'd never seen anything like it before. Remember, this was the 90s, pre-internet, and there was a lot less information out there about this stuff back then. I freaked out a bit at the sight of the cuts, and asked Vic why she did it. I always remember her answer, because it's ugly. He doesn't like ugly things. I know what you're thinking, and nowadays I think the same. But back then, I was just a kid and didn't know how to deal with a situation like Vic's, so I did the only thing I can think of at the time. And ignored it. Yes, I won't lie, I still hate myself a little over that. Anyway, the years dragged on and Vic and I became weird kid besties, sharing adventures up on the Green and helping each other survive the ravages of high school. About 6 months before the end, Vic started getting real lethargic, like falling asleep in class, dark circles around the eyes lethargic. She got sent to the nurse's office a lot, where she spent most of the time asleep. I think the teachers were pretty lenient on her because they suspected what was going on at home. I mean, there are laws about mandatory reporting and whatever, but who knows? I guess they did what they could. Sometimes I used to sit in the nurse's office while Vic slept, just so she wouldn't have to wake up alone. She had nightmares, like real bad nightmares, which I guess is why she didn't sleep so well. She told me once she used to dream the Shredded was chasing her. The Shredded was a monster we made up as part of the mythos of the Green. Here's the backstory of the Shredded. Once upon a time, she'd been the king's wife, gentle and kind, and more beautiful than anything in the kingdom. All men wanted her, and all women wanted to be her, that sort of thing, as is always the case in these stories. One day, the king went to war. When he returned, he began to suspect his wife had been cheating on him with the other men at the court. She, of course, assured him her heat and body belonged to him and him alone. To no avail. The king's paranoia grew. He had his wife locked in a tower, but was convinced men were stealing in through the window at night, so he had her locked in a dungeon instead. Even filthy in the dark, she was still beautiful, still coveted by the dungeon's jailers. So the king had a hideous mask made from iron bands, and the flayed head of a deer, which he made wielded in a place over her head. Even that did nothing to hide his wife's beauty, nor stop other men from dreaming that, one day, they'd be able to rescue her and claim her for their own. Eventually, the king decided once and for all to make his wife as ugly outside as he believed she was inside. He had her stripped naked, bar her rotting deer head mask, and dragged her on all fours through the streets. As she crawled, the people of the kingdom, still jealous of her and afraid of the king, whipped her with stitches and belted her with stones. Her bones snapped and her skin was shredded from her body. And still the king dragged her on, until there was nothing left but a pile of broken, mangled meat beneath a rotting deer head. Finally, as if woken from a dream, the king saw what he had done. He tore the mask from his wife's head, only to find her beautiful face underneath, thin and dirty, but otherwise as beautiful as she'd been the day they wed. The king howled in grief and remorse for his cruelty. But it was too late. His wife was already nothing more than a beautiful face atop a broken, mangled corpse. The king held that corpse, weeping, well into the night, until the moon rose high and full and red above him, and the mangled flesh in his hand began to stir. The king cried in joy, believing a miracle was returning his wife to him. It was, in a sense, but the creature that arose was not his beautiful, gentle wife, but a gruesome monster of raw muscle and tattered flesh, starvation-thinned limbs broken and twisted, and shoulders topped with a grinning, rotting deer skull. The Shredded. Vic had been the one to make up the Shredded, and now it was chasing her in her dreams. We'd never really gotten around to figuring out what it did exactly, only that it wasn't the sort of thing you wanted chasing you. I tried telling Vic it was just a story, just a dumb thing we'd made up. She told me she could smell it, that every night it got a little closer, and every night the smell got a little stronger. A rotten smell, like sour milk and rusted iron. I didn't have the heart to tell Vic that was her own smell, and that, yeah, it was getting worse. It followed her around almost like a physical presence, sticking to everything she touched, including me. My other friends knew I'd been hanging out with Vic because of the stink she'd leave on my clothes. Even my parents noticed. I started taking a lot more showers. The end of the year loomed, and Vic just got worse and worse. She started getting really, really thin, like skeletal thin, anorexia thin. Her eyes sunken and wild. She started hallucinating, which I learned later is a side effect of staying awake too long. Like sometimes we'd just be hanging out or whatever, and she'd grab me and start pointing out nothing, saying things like, "There, it's right there, can't you see it?" At first she'd be pointing far away, like across the oval far away. But every day it was a little closer, across the car park, across the auditorium, across the classroom, until one lunchtime, we were in the bathroom, and Vic suddenly yelled, "It's here, run!" and dragged me forcefully out. I remember her fingers were strong, like iron bands, which shocked me because she seemed so thin and frail. As we ran, I swear I felt something brush against my back. I mean, I relived that a lot over the years. Vic's behavior was really scaring me by then, so I kept trying to tell myself it was nothing. Just hysteria. Just getting caught up in the moment. Imagining fictioning monsters on it because it was earlier to deal with that than reality. I keep telling myself that, but that doesn't explain the stain on the back of my hoodie I've been wearing. A big, dark, hand-shaped smear. One that wouldn't come out. One that stank like cheese and iron, no matter how many times it was washed. Vic told me the Shredded was chasing her in her dreams. That maybe it had always been chasing her. It'd just taken this long to get to our world from the green. The real green. Not her imagined empty lot. That's why she didn't want to sleep. Because it was so close now. All it had to do was reach out and grab her and what? I asked. But Vic never knew. The last time I saw Vic alive, it was Thursday. She was sitting in her usual place, on the stairs behind the science block, and she looked and smelt like a corpse. But she was calm. Calmer than I'd seen her in months. I remember she looked at me, eyes big and soft and gentle, and she said, "I know what it wants now. It wants to make me ugly. If I'm ugly, he won't touch me." They were the last words she'd ever said to me. Vic wasn't at school that afternoon, or the day after. On Monday, the cops came. They told me Vic had been found dead in the stormwater drain in Ebflow Hollow, in the green belt across from my house. She'd finally cut in deep. There was a big investigation. In the end, Vic's death was ruled a suicide. Her uncle had been under suspicion for a while, but with no complaining witness, they couldn't make anything stick. A month after the verdict, they found him badly mauled in the local park, attacked by something that had torn off his face and his hands and his dick. He lived, but barely, shredded in body and in mind. Official verdict was that it had been a feral dog, and no one looked too hard after that. It'd been nearly 20 years, but I still think about Vic a lot, particularly when the moon is high, full and red. On those nights, I dream I'm walking through the green. It's cold and I'm barefoot, and there's something following behind me. It smells like sour milk and rusted iron, and sometimes I can see its shadow on the ground, body a thin and twisted tatter, skull dripping and grinning deer. It's behind me and I'm afraid, but it never gets any closer, and I never turn around.